My name is Harvey Branscombe. I'm a local Roaring Fork Valley resident from El Jebel, and I am here on television with three very interesting gentlemen who are sitting next to me to perform an experiment on television. The experiment is to try to discuss the topic of Israelis, Palestinians, and Gaza. First of all, it might be a good idea to discuss what it is actually that is okay to discuss on this topic.
Yeah, I'd like to, as someone who runs a public access television station, has a keen interest in freedom of speech, and the idea that if you can't have a civil discourse on any topic, regardless of how strong the emotions are on either side, what is the alternative? And often on the world stage, between governments, it's war, it's violence. So as a person who travels around the world and probably confronts barriers to varying degrees, to be able to express, right or wrong, your point of view. Can you address that issue?
I think that discourse should be defined as a set of boundaries. And the first question you want to ask yourself, what is it that we are not supposed to talk about? And it is very interesting. To start with, I am becoming freer all the time. The opposition against me is weakening, not because they don't want to silence me, is because the viewpoint is becoming more and more unpopular. I'm talking about Zionists and the people who serve Israeli interests within the media and political discourse. They're becoming very, very unpopular these days. However, I think that the best way to look at issue of freedom of speech and boundaries within the discourse in the West is the Holocaust. Why it is so interesting? Because it is kind of an historic chapter, actually, within our living memory that is just not allowed to be discussed in public.
What about it is not allowed to be discussed in public? Because I've heard many discussions of it in public. I have had many discussions on my radio show. What is it that we're not allowed to talk about in public?
To start with, if you take, for instance, European countries such as Germany or Austria, quite a few countries in Europe created a body of legislation that is called Holocaust denial, and you at a very severe risk of being thrown to jail once you suspect one of the accepted facts. Now, I myself, I'm not an historian, but my logic is is devastatingly simple. If I come home tomorrow and my wife comes down the stairs panicking, don't go to upstairs, don't go to the bedroom, I would obviously realize that something is wrong. And when Jewish lobbies, as well as Western governments, try to do whatever they can to stop anyone from touching subjects to do with the Holocaust, I'm very concerned. Now,
why in the United States, it's worth pointing out, we have no such restriction.
I know.
We have no law against talking about it. We have no law against denying it.
Yeah, this is very interesting.
So this is very important, though, because if the issue is what the law prohibits us from talking about, that's a very real issue in Germany and Europe. In the United States, the law doesn't prevent us from talking about it. Maybe other things prevent us, but certainly not the law.
I can answer it because in some countries, in some societies, you can ban or block a discourse by legislation. In some discourses, you just do it by exclusion. 2 days ago, I was giving a talk and I played some music in Rochester and Geneva, in upstate New York, and a jazz journalist, a Jewish Zionist, neoconservative jazz journalist, tried to stop me from doing it.
From playing.
From playing. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Oh, American jazz listeners, don't go and listen to this Holocaust denier." He obviously failed. He obviously failed because, you know, we had full rooms in both places, and it was very interesting. And funny enough, more than half of the audience in both venues were actually Jews. Now, anyway, I'm not talking about. I'm not an historian, and I'm not talking about the historicity of the Holocaust. So it wasn't even an issue, but it was a means of censorship, not through legislation, but through the threat of exclusion. However, what I say about this form of censorship, I believe that once we stop thinking of history in terms of revisionism, if we are not allowed to look into the past and to reshape it, we eventually lose a prospect of future. We lose hope. We stop and we don't understand what is the meaning of our past.
Can you give another example where that's happened?
No, because as it happens, the only chapter in history that we are not allowed to touch is the Holocaust, and the people who are the political lobbies that are handling the campaign here in America are obviously Israeli and Jewish lobbies. However, there is another chapter that is very similar.
But I'm not Jewish.
Yeah.
I'm Irish American. I'm not a member of any of those lobbies.
Yeah, I'm sure.
When I hear that, and I think it's very much valid to frame the question as a freedom of speech issue. Okay, but if it is a matter, what I wanted to ask you was there a Holocaust? Did it happen?
Now, this is a very interesting.
Because I'll
question.
tell you why.
Yeah.
Because I think that we could all probably agree that Hitler existed.
For sure.
Right. So if somebody got up and said, "There's no freedom of speech here because I'm not allowed to get up in Germany and say Hitler didn't exist," would you fight just as hard for his right?
No, because I'm not concerned that much with the issue.
But it's a free speech issue.
But
it's a free speech issue. It doesn't really matter.
I'll be very.
You see my
very,
point, I think.
No, for sure. I'll be very simple.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on issues to do with freedom of speech. If I, for instance, argue that this cup is a football, I'm free to do it. But you will look at me and you say, "Oh, you're slightly deluded here, huh?" In order to talk about history or about factuality, we have to imply correspondence rules. Correspondence rules between what we say and what is conceived to be the reality. So this is a cup of coffee or water or whatever.
Well, wait a minute. It's not a question of what's perceived to be the reality. In my opinion, it's the question of there is a body of evidence that establishes the Holocaust. Now, we can perhaps argue over how many, we can even argue over if, but there is an argument to be made that it is one of the most well-documented
It is not, actually.
historical events of all time.
It is not.